So good evening, everyone. Welcome to Science at the Theater's House of the Future, sponsored by the Friends of Berkeley Lab and co-sponsored by the Berkeley Energy Resources Collaborative. My name is Jeff Miller, and I'm Head of Public Affairs. As I mentioned on this stage 2 weeks ago, every day is Earth Day at Berkeley Lab. When our scientists talk shop, the health of the planet is always part of the conversation. That fact makes the lab very much a part of the Berkeley tradition, leading the way, looking at the big picture. Those of us who work at the lab know this, and because we share in this kind of edgy excitement all the time, we think of Science at the Theater as our way of sharing that excitement with you. We hope you agree. Tonight's lab experts, Iain Walker, Ann Piette, and Bruce Nordman, all seated in front of me here, will be in a way talking to you across your kitchen table where all the big decisions are made, right? Think about it. What does the future hold for the roof over our heads, for our HVAC systems, for our windows, for building and insulation materials? Our computer is going to drive our homes, and we hope with more success than a car company that I might name. These are all important questions for us as consumers, homeowners, renters, as global citizens. Now, we might not be writing legislation in the halls of Congress, but we do have some power over where and how we live. And we can vote. Tonight, though, you won't be going to the polls. You'll be seated in your seats. We're introducing text voting to Science at the Theater. I'll be talking some more about how that's going to work in a few minutes. A few other general comments. As always, please fill out our audience surveys, which you received when you entered, and return them to one of our volunteers when you exit. We will start planning our fall series soon, and your comments are always very helpful and instructive. Speaking of exits, there are exits located here and here. Please keep them in mind in case you need to use them later. We hope that's not the case. And for the question and answer period following the presentations, which will be about 12 to 15 minutes long, we are going to be in the audience with the mics, using them as handhelds and bringing the mics to you so you can stay seated. We expect a lot of questions tonight, so we're going to ask that you only ask one and not do a follow-up. We think a lot of people are going to want to be able to participate, so we're going to try to control it in that fashion. Now, I'm very happy to introduce our special guest, State Assembly Member Nancy Skinner, who is well known to many of you. Assemblymember Skinner has a long record of environmental policy activism. We are very pleased that she will not only kick off the evening, but join us at least for the beginning part of the question and answer period. Please welcome Assemblymember Skinner.
Thank you. It's great to see so many people interested in the science series. I'm really happy that we have LBNL right in our midst. And that we can access not only the benefits of their research in policies that get enacted in the state, also in appliances that get manufactured, new technologies, lots of solar and renewable energy activities and such, or technologies, are a lot of the initial research is done right at LBNL. But we also get the benefit of being able to hear the researchers bring their science down to a very practical matter and talk to us about how it might apply in our daily lives. The discussion tonight is about homes of the future. And I would imagine, but I don't want to predict because we get to hear, that it's going to be talking a lot about new construction and what new homes in some point in the future might look like. But interestingly enough, we have already in California, and in Berkeley for sure, a very existing building stock. And interestingly enough, while California has the best energy efficiency building code in the US, Title 24, about 70% of our residential properties were built prior to the enactment of Title 24. So that means that many of those properties are not so efficient. Now in Berkeley, we've had upgrades to much of our residential properties, partly because we have a pretty well-educated populace who appreciates and values energy efficiency, but also partly because we have a local ordinance, actually two ordinances, SECO and RECO, which mandate that at the time of sale, our properties, our commercial and residential properties, are improved from an energy efficiency point of view. Well, I was very fortunate to have the governor just sign into law AB 758, which I introduced in my first year in the Assembly, which will bring that similar concept to the commercial and residential buildings all throughout the state of California. So what AB 758 does is directs our California Energy Commission and our CPUC, our California Public Utilities Commission, which oversees our investor-owned utilities, and basically asks them to work together to develop a series of incentives, mandates, and other mechanisms that will help bring up to a much higher efficiency all of our existing building stock, all of the building stock that was built pre-Title 24, so residential and commercial. So I'm eagerly awaiting to see how both the Energy Commission and the PUC develop those regs and how it plays out in our state and helps us improve all of our building stock. And of course, I'll be really looking forward to hearing from our researchers tonight to what kind of ideas they have. And before I turn it back over to them, I'm also very thankful that we are back in a position where we have a federal government that is listening to science, that is allowing science to help direct much of its policy, thank goodness. And we have our own former Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory Director, Stephen Chu, at the helm of the Department of Energy. So it's wonderful. Yes, we can clap for that too. And afterwards in the discussion period, if there's questions that you might have that are other than what's been presented about either things around energy or renewable energy or other policies that the state may be considering, I'd be happy to take those kind of questions. So thanks so much.
So thank you, Nancy. For those veterans in the audience, you know I always ask how many of you are here for the first time and ask you to raise your hands. So please keep them down. Tonight we're not going to do that. We're going to actually have you text, but we're going to test out the system to make sure everything's working correctly. So get out your cell phones, put them on silent. For those who have a text message plan, this will be free. For those who don't, it'll probably cost you 20 cents. So I'm letting you know that in advance. So you need to text in. You're going to be calling 22333. So if you are a first-timer at Science at Theater, you need to then text 2371. If you've been here before, you can text 2367. So now we will watch like a game show host. Let's see what happens. Okay. Votes still coming in, kind of like Chicago. Don't vote more than once. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. No stuffing the ballot box. Okay. So it looks like we have a lot of first-timers. That is great. Now, to get you in the mood for the topic at hand, I'm not sure. This time I am going to ask you to raise your hands. How many of you remember Disneyland's House of the Future? A few. Okay. Well, for those who don't, we're going to take a little trip down memory lane and show you a 60-second clip from 1957. It's a YouTube video. The quality is not great when blown up this high, but I think you will at least get the idea of what the future looked like 53 years ago.
One of the newest additions here is the Monsanto House of the Future. It's always open house, so let's join the others for a preview of tomorrow's living. Dishwashing chores will be a pleasure, especially when this ultrasonic dishwasher does the job, and it never drops a one. Convenience is right at your fingertips here. While father has a quick electronic shave on the house, daughter finds a lavatory that can be tailored to size. And Junior brightens up here and there with the electric toothbrush. Since its opening a short time ago, over 1 million guests have visited this home.
So I'm embarrassed to say that I actually was one of those kids in that. Not that, actually I was there in 1957. Okay, now we will talk about the real house of the future. Our first presenter, Iain Walker. Please join me on stage. It's a warm hand for him.
Some form of remote control. We're going to try out another bit of technology here. Oh, okay. I just want to start out by saying, what is a zero energy home? And right here we say net zero. That doesn't mean a house that doesn't use any energy at all, because probably most of you want to do things like have lights to read by, watch a bit of television, that sort of thing, maybe heat your home. So it doesn't mean it uses no energy. The net means that we're going to build a very energy efficient home that doesn't use very much, and we're going to try and get the rest of the energy from using renewables. And Nancy kind of stole my thunder a little bit here. I was hoping that you would all have visions of crazy plexiglass homes out in the desert that are in the shape of pyramids and so on, and those are the homes we can live in, but actually not. It turns out we're very, very unlikely to be knocking down all of the homes in Berkeley and building new zero energy homes. The homes we're going to be living that are zero energy in the future are going to be the homes that you live in now. And the question is, how do we take the homes that you're living in now and turn them into something else? And that's what I'm going to talk about for about 10 minutes here. I'd like to start out by saying, or thinking about where does all the energy go in a home? And this is a fun time little chart that splits things up a little bit to give you some sort of guidance. Now this is averages over the whole state of California. So it's not your house or my house, it's averages. And the reason why I wanted to point that out is that if you see here, we've got lots of heat and hot water and all that sort of stuff, but you don't see anything, for example, on air conditioning. And if you lived in the Central Valley of California, your pie chart might look a little different because there would be air conditioning on there instead. One thing I wanted to point out is that we probably all are connected to electricity and gas. The PG&E, if you live in Berkeley. I live in Alameda, so I have Alameda Power for my electricity and so on. But the split is roughly about a third electricity, 2/3 gas for people living in California. And most of that gas is used to heat homes and used to heat hot water. And the surprising thing is that even if you go out to hot places like Fresno and Bakersfield, they're still using a lot of natural gas, not just for hot water, but also heat their homes. Even though we often think of them as being an air conditioning dominated place, we have to do a lot of cooling, they're still using plenty of natural gas for heating. And when we divide things up like this and see where the energy goes, it gives us some idea about what we need to do to homes to eliminate a lot of this energy use. And the two obvious ones you can see from this chart are, let's do something about heating or cooling our homes if we put cooling up there. So we want to make the shell of the building better walls, better windows, that sort of thing. And the other thing is hot water, doing something about hot water. But our problem is that until recently, we thought about saving, say, 20% of the energy in a home was a really, really good idea, and that was about how far we could go. But now we're talking about 75%. And so just looking at the heat and the hot water parts of that is nowhere near enough. We've got to get at everything in a home. And so here's a sort of a shopping list or a laundry list, if you will, of all the things you could do in a home to get that 75%. And I've got a few little illustrations that show what to do. First of all, we've got to do something about heating and cooling your home. And that means we need better windows, better building envelope, we've got to insulate the home. And you're probably all familiar with insulation, although very, very few homes in Berkeley are insulated. Most of you, if you ripped open the walls, you'd find nothing in there. But it's not enough just to stuff some insulation there, and you can see from the pictures that I show that when people have actually done this, because there have been some homes built like this, they find they have to build on the outside of the home and add more insulation on the outside. We've got to do something about hot water, and a very popular thing to do, particularly in our climate, is to put a solar hot water system in where you heat or preheat some of the hot water by putting some panels on your roof or in your backyard that capture some sunshine, and we get enough of that. Of course, I'm cheating because I live in Alameda. We always have the donut of sunshine. We don't get the foggy, cloudy days that you guys get, so it's a little easier at my house. We do something about lighting, and probably almost all, do all of you have at least one CFL in your home? And if you don't know what a CFL is, we can talk about it later. Well, pretty soon, it might be all you can buy. But the new stuff coming along is LED lighting, which is sort of what CFLs were 20 years ago. It's going to be yet another step more efficient. And Moving on from that, we can use less water, pick the right sort of appliances and so on. One thing I want to point out is it's not enough just to go shopping and buy stuff. We have to do these things right. There's 1,000 wrong ways to install the insulation and install the windows and buy the wrong appliances and so on. And that is often a step that is overlooked. And historically in the building industry, this has been one of our big problems. We've been able to buy good insulation for, 50, 60 years. Our problems are getting it installed right. You can buy the greatest insulation in the world. If you don't install it right, you won't get the benefits, you won't save the energy. And the very last bullet item, which is the one that causes most people the most grief, is, are we going to ask you to change the way you live? Do you want to go to sleep when the little birdies go to sleep and not use any electric light? Do you never want to watch television again? Do you never want to turn on any heat and you'll just put on extra layers when it gets cold, run around naked when it's hot, all that sort of stuff? Do you want to change your life? Now, plenty of people, and some of them work at the lab, and I bet some of you are here in the room, have made lifestyle changes to save energy, and that's fair enough. But what we want to be able to do is reach everybody. And when you want to reach everybody, there are far, far fewer people willing to change their lifestyles to save 75%. And that's why it becomes a bit of an issue. One of the things that can help if you want some more specific advice about your home, I just gave some very general numbers there for energy use across the state, is to go to this wonderful website. It's the Home Energy Saver. It's hosted by the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. So you can go there, enter a little bit of information about your home, and it'll give you some clues and some tips about energy savings, things you can do in your home, and very rough estimates of how much energy you're going to use and where you could save those things. And this is just this is a fun site because you can sort of play around a little bit by saying, what if I did this, what if I do that, and see how much your energy can change in your home. I said all those wonderful things, and it seems so easy, right? We just go out and buy some insulation and some new windows, and we'll fix everything. And of course, you all know that the reason why we haven't all already done that is because it costs money. And it costs real amounts of money. To get to that 75% savings is very, very difficult. And the people who have already done that, and there's probably something like 100 to 200 homes nationwide where people have done this sort of very, very deep retrofit to their homes successfully. They spent in the range of $50,000 to $100,000. Which is quite a lot of money. I can't afford it right now, but this is just to give you some perspective. So they found that a lot of it was the PV systems that let them get to that net zero. They needed that electricity generated on site. And they, on average, spent something like $30,000 on PV. And if we want to reduce this cost, there's a couple of ways to go. We can make those insulation systems better windows, try and make them less expensive, make them easier to install, because something like 2/3 of that cost is the labor to get all this done. It's not buying the insulation or buying the windows or buying the light bulbs, it's paying someone to do it. And so a lot of these homes have actually been done by crazy geeks like me, where they did all the work themselves and made it a little cheaper, but we can't expect everybody to do that, right? So we have some serious cost issues that we still have to address. And boy, would I love to get rid of that on-site generation, and maybe we will. We'll talk about that in a minute. Firstly, I wanted to just rewind a little bit. So all of that has been talking about what you could do to a home that you already live in. Well, what I'm saying is there are technologies that we already know of. You can go to Home Depot and buy all the stuff you want to build a 75% energy-saving home. The problem is it's going to cost you a lot of money. In a new home, it's much, much easier to do all those things like have better insulation, better windows, better appliances. You don't have to tear a house apart or build a lot of extra wall on the outside or take old windows out and put new ones in. So a lot of those labor costs are far, far diminished. In fact, the labor costs really don't change to build a zero energy new home compared with a regular new home. We still have the costs of putting PV on the roof and stuff like that, but it makes it a little easier. The other thing we do with a new home is something which is very un-American, and I'm allowed to say it because I'm not one, and that is you could live in a smaller home. Now, in Berkeley, of course, you already, if we look at national averages, you're already living in small homes. But across the country, your average new home is approaching something like 3,000 square feet. It's quite a substantial mansion, right? I mean, you guys all know this. If you just built a house that was, say, only 1,200 square feet instead of 3,000, right? And took the money that you save by making it smaller, the house would be cheaper and would be a zero energy home. It would actually cost you less. But you'd have to live happily in a smaller home like people lived in the 1950s. And once again, that gets back to issues of lifestyle and so on. But I contend that, maybe it's not so bad. But if we don't change the size of the homes, that $50,000 to $100,000 cost increment, it gets down to about $25,000, and people are working on making that even smaller. So I talked about just then what we can do now. What you could do now in your homes, what we're doing now in new construction. But sometimes it's okay to look a little bit into the future, and I wanted to hit on just a few things. First of all, a lot of those issues I talked about where we can have all this wonderful stuff, but if it's not installed right in your home, it won't work very well. A lot of that comes down to the mentality that we have in the building industry, which is that the lowest first cost is the only thing that matters. So automatically, we are selecting the very worst contractor. We are selecting the very worst way to get a house built because we've said we want it as cheap as you can do it. So everybody, the entire business has rushed to the bottom. We have to get out of that mentality. We have to imagine that people actually live in homes and want to live in nice homes that perform well and don't need very much maintenance because they were built properly in the first place. We want to imagine that people are going to pay a little bit extra to live well. We do that in many, many other aspects of our lives in terms of things like we'll buy nice clothes to wear, we'll buy a nice car to drive, and we expect to pay a premium for that. But in housing, the building industry, everyone is addicted to this idea that, no, we must have the absolute worst, and it's the only acceptable thing is to have the absolute worst. I'm going to get off that, okay? So it is okay to pay a little bit more for something better, and I would love it if people would apply that to the houses that they lived in, considering the fact that we actually live in them. I think it... But there's some sort of mental disconnect. We need better ways to do some of these things. We've really got to attack that cost problem, I think, if anything's going to become widespread. And there's some work being done on that. At the lab, for example, I have a few things that are very, very hard to see because of the color contrast, but it doesn't matter. We're working on things like, instead of having to have a bigger air conditioner, or an air conditioner, make your air conditioner work harder, we'll put a cool roof on your building for when you're air conditioning to reduce a lot of those air conditioning loads. We're looking at smart windows that do things like in the winter, they will let more heat in than in the summertime. We're looking at things like ways to ventilate your home, because if we've made these homes lovely and airtight to try and save energy, the last thing we want to do is to have bad indoor air quality for whatever reason, whether you're worried about moisture problems or odors or getting rid of dust and other pollutants. So we need to still ventilate our homes, but right now we do this in a very, very crude way. We just turn a fan on, for example, and let it run. We need to stop doing that and have a smart way to do it instead. And the last thing I was talking about is this whole idea of living in a high-quality home. We need a way to test homes to know if they're high quality or not. And right now, our test methods are pretty crude and not very reliable, and we're working on making those things a lot better. This problem I'm talking about here with heritage, I live in a lovely old home in Alameda. And when I think about how am I going to insulate my home, I've got this beautiful hardwood paneling inside. I don't want to drill any holes in that. And I'm sure some of you people live in very nice craftsman cottages in Berkeley that are architecturally very pleasant to look at. You don't want to change how it looks from the outside, and you probably don't want to damage any of the interior finishes. So we have a big challenge, because there are lots of houses like that, where we simply can't do things like change the appearance of the windows because the city won't let us, even if we wanted to. And if we wanted to, maybe we like the look of those old windows. So how are we going to develop new products that let us keep our houses look beautiful because we like the way they look, but still do something in an energy efficient way? Looking far into the future, so this is true crystal ball glazing now. Eventually, we're going to live in all electric homes. We won't be burning natural gas in our homes anymore because it'll be all gone. And so when we're planning for the future, we need to think about how to make our homes electric, because all of those things that we do with natural gas in home, whether it's cooking, making hot water, heating, we can do all of those things electrically. But we have to be a little bit careful about is where the electricity comes from. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier about all those PV panels on roofs. I'd like to see those go away right now. I think that what we need to do is keep our grid, but put stuff into the grid that is from renewables and take it out. So we don't have to have something on every single roof. And the reason why I say that is there's a whole lot of wasted stuff going on there. Every single home has to have all these clever electronics to connect it to the grid and look at the meters and so on. We don't need to do that. We can save a lot of time, effort, and money and make things a lot cheaper to go renewable if we do it on a very, very large scale. Don't do it on every single home. The other thing we need to do is a lot of renewables don't happen all the time. And I'm thinking of the ones you're thinking of, like the sun shines during the day, but at night, when you want to turn on electric things like lights, there's no sunshine. You need to store it. Same thing if we're going to go with wind and wave power, the storage issues. Now, we're a bit lucky here in the East Bay in that we have things like water hills. And I'm a mechanical engineer, and when I see that and I think about storage, I think about I'm just going to have a pump, right? And I'll pump it up when I've got it, let it flow back with the pump, generate electricity later. We can't do that everywhere, mind you, but we can certainly do it here in the East Bay. But I think we've got to look around the state and around the nation and think of ways of having large-scale storage of our renewables. Because in 100 years from now, you pretty much guarantee that's where we'll be. There's really no way out, right? We're going to have to go there eventually, so we should think about it a little bit now. And that's all from me, and now you can hear from Mary Ann.
Well, before we hear from Mary Ann, we're going to vote again. So now that you know what a net zero energy home is, how many of you think that you will actually ever live in one? So again, text in 22333. So yes, I will live in a net zero energy home is 2039. No, you'll text in 2051, maybe 2038. Okay. Oh, Iain, you were very convincing. Oh, well, maybe not. No, no's. Like, well, still, coming. Wow. You were very convincing, Ann. And we're going to ask that question again to close out the evening to see if any of you have changed your mind. So let's keep those figures in mind, about 60% yes and maybe 30%. Okay, Mary Ann, please join us.
So I'm Mary Ann Piette, and I'm work on something called demand response. And I'm going to talk a little about my orb here, which is still finding the signal from PG&E. So before I go through the slides themselves, I want to introduce a concept that I want you to think about. It is hard to see here, isn't it? The lights are in my eyes. I was here a couple of years ago, and I'm going to use some of the same material that I presented then. And the material here is more about the home. So we're going to talk not about how much energy you use, but when you use it. Because in California, I'm going to talk a little about the electric grid. And it was a great introduction from Iain, because we're thinking now about the fact that we're going to have more electrification. And as you know, we're probably going to have electrification of our cars as well. So I'm going to start with the basic idea of power versus energy, because we really want people to understand the difference. So we use a watt as a joule per second, and a 100-watt bulb is sort of a classic unit that we can think of, and a kilowatt hour is 1,000 watts for 1 hour. So it gives us some sense of scale as we think about energy units. So that's 10 100-watt bulbs for 1 hour. Now, the very interesting thing about the electric grid is that in California, the peak demand is growing faster than the base load. And Iain was talking a lot about homes in our area, but homes out in the Central Valley use a lot of air conditioning. So as we've had more inland growth, our peak has been growing faster than the base load. And the peak is very expensive. We have more power plants we need more transmission system, we have more transmission and distribution. And what's really interesting is how steep this curve is. So as we get towards those peak hours, which is about 50,000 megawatts, you can see that as we go from 45,000 megawatts to 50,000 megawatts, that's 5,000 megawatts, and it's less than 1% of the hours. Okay, so it's a very steep peak, and that's a very expensive system. It also makes the system less reliable because the grid is at capacity. So when we have blackouts and brownouts, it's because our consumption is exceeding the capacity of the grid, and those hours are very expensive. So our winter peak is much less, and we really want to reduce these hours because they cause the system to be more expensive. And right now, people pay prices that don't reflect that expensive time there. So California has a policy of trying to move towards a time when people actually see those prices. And that's what this device is here. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Now, in California, most of what we do today is we actually phone people up, and we have spare the air days. And on those days, people are asked to change their electric loads. And they actually phone up and email the buildings. And the technology I'm going to be talking about is technology developed primarily initially for commercial buildings, but it's starting to move into homes, and I'll explain that. But essentially what's happening is when the grid is full, people are getting phone calls to change their lights or to change their thermostat and to change the services in the building to try to shift the load to times when there's more energy available. So what we've developed is this box here, and this box is called a client, and it's listening to a server, and it's got relays on it, and it's basically running an XML code. And we have a couple hundred of these in buildings around the state, and we're starting to do this in homes as well. This is a company called Akuacom that all the utilities in California offer this technology where we actually allow the prices that are being sent by the utility to be received by this box, and the box is then programmed to change the loads in the building when the signals change. So all year long, it's normal, 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 but then the signals go to moderate or high, and the building is pre-programmed to change its load. So here in the picture, I have a person, who's outside, and they could be at the golf or at the ball game, and the building still changes its thermostat and its lighting level. And this system here is listening to price signals. So we're actually automating people to respond to prices, and we're starting to move towards a time when you will see higher prices on hot summer days. So right now you're paying mostly flat prices, but you might have lower prices at night and higher prices in the day, but on these special days where there's maybe 10 a year, the price is actually maybe $1 a kilowatt hour. And you can pre-program your building to change using something like this. Now, the important thing about this is that you don't need a box. It's actually all internet code. So 50 control companies now offer this technology built into their control system. And this company, Akuacom, was just bought by Honeywell. And so your thermostat of the future can receive these signals. We've worked with GE and Whirlpool, so your dishwasher of the future can listen to these signals. So you'll have the ability to set your price responsiveness. If somebody's home and you don't want the thermostat to change, you might not change it much at all. But if you know there's something happening, you can pre-cool the building, and you can actually develop strategies in the home to be responsive. Now, this device over here is called an energy orb, and this is still finding the PG&E signal. It will turn to blue when it finds the signal. Right now, it's booting, and this technology was initially developed for stock traders, and it's called an ambient orb device, and it is designed to be in the background, and it'll change colors when the electric price goes up. So this is a feedback device that's been developed to help you understand when the price goes to higher prices, it'll go to orange or to red. Right now, you can see it's booting through these colors. It has these little LED lights inside it, and it'll find a pager signal, and it'll go to blue. So essentially, we're developing technology that allows your home to be responsive to the electric grid. This is what a demand response aggregated shed looks like. And this is from commercial buildings. We've been doing this with IKEA and Walmart and Target, and Chabot Space Sciences is one of our buildings, Bank of America, data centers, schools, all sorts of buildings. And as I said, it's starting to move into the homes, so you'll have the opportunity to have your home participate in these programs, and devices will be listening to signals that are generated from the electric utility. Now, this is my last slide, and this slide is important because you've probably all heard about we call it the Prius effect. So that if you have feedback, do people change their behavior if they actually have feedback? And Iain was talking a little about the home of the future and the net zero home. My talk is a good transition between Iain's and Bruce's, because Bruce is going to talk a lot about information and networking. But what we know is that people actually like to understand their consumption habits better. So you'll get information not just on how much you're using, but when you're using it. So you can find out what's happening in my house at night. How big is the load at night versus the daytime when I'm awake and cooking or watching TV, and I could actually turn something on and off and see the change. So right now, we're moving towards a time where you're going to have more information, and there's a lot of interest in research on behavior and what's the right way to display information that people take action on. So is it dollars? Is it CO2? Is it comparison with their neighbor? What's the right information? And that's actually one that people know, that people respond to, is how do I compare with my neighbors? Do I have 3 teenagers and they don't have any kids at home, or what is the difference? So it's a world where we're going to use the information to communicate with people, but we're also going to use the information to model your consumption and maybe even giving you recommendations on what if you retrofitted your refrigerator, what if you got a new device. So you could use these things as tools like that home energy saver tool that Iain showed. So it's an exciting time for building energy research, and it's an exciting time for energy efficiency because the internet and the smart grid are allowing us to do things we couldn't do before. So we're really putting together the work of tools for information management to help us have better information on energy consumption patterns. So that's it.
Thank you, Marianne. So we're now going to test your behavior. Another vote. So we're going to test the Prius effect. If in fact you did have a way, okay, with seeing how much energy you use and when you're using it actually gets you to change your behavior and save more energy. So yes, 3610, no, 3611, don't know, 3609. People are taking their time this time, huh? Okay.
We're saving energy.
Ah, okay. Well, don't in this case. Ah, okay. Well, you're either not voting, as I think you are, or we're not receiving. Okay, so we're not going to worry about that. We're going to move on. I want to give a special hand to our next presenter, Bruce Nordman, who broke his ankle several weeks ago, but still decided to come and make a presentation tonight.
Thank you. In the future, bones will heal faster, so that'll make life a lot better. So I want to take a little different tack. Most of what we tend to do is start from the present and incrementally work towards the future one step at a time, and that's absolutely necessary, yes, and appropriate. But there's another approach to this, which is to start from the future, and I take about 20 years in the future as my reference point, and then work backwards towards the present to decide where we want to end up, what do we need to do if we actually want to get there. And it's really critical to take both approaches. So I've become convinced that the networking aspect of buildings is what's going to be the biggest change in our houses in general, and that can actually have good energy impacts. So the picture on the left is from 1929 from Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion house, and this was his idea of the house of the future, and he thought that it could actually be mass-produced very quickly with available materials in the 1930s, and that is the type of house people might live in. Now, this house on the right is actually my house, which was remodeled recently, so probably in 20 years it's going to look very, very much like it does today. So we now have a difference of 100 years between these two houses of the future, and in fact, it's the futuristic house, which is the old one, and in fact, the old-looking house, which is the new one. As several people mentioned, our houses today are really sort of our houses of the future. So when people have thought about house of the future in the past, over the last 100 years or so, they tended to have three major goals: to make them comfortable, efficient, and affordable. And actually, if you look in the popular literature or when people do houses of the future today, the affordability sometimes goes out the window because they make these monstrous houses, and I don't know if they're efficient, but they are certainly trying for comfort. But what they've always tended to do is focus on the structure of the house and the materials, because that's sort of the tools that they have at hand. And so that's sort of how they can conceive of transforming the future. And so that's really the paradigm of physics. That's what you're working with, is the physics of materials and the physics of structures. Now, this is the same Monsanto house of the future from Disneyland, sort of better living through chemistry, which I realize actually is DuPont's slogan, not Monsanto's slogan. So that was a mistake on my part. Luckily, I checked it this afternoon. But in any case, so is chemistry the new paradigm? People have thought about biology as a new paradigm for buildings. But again, another new possible paradigm is information. So in this book on yesterday's houses of tomorrow, they talk about these past houses of the future. And this first quote gets to sort of the tragedy of architecture. And I studied architecture myself, and the ideal thing you do is you design a house for a specific set of people at a specific point in their lives. You take a snapshot and you make it perfect for them. But of course, most architecture is not designed for specific people, and even when it is, most of the time those people are older than when you designed it for them, or there's other people living there. So it's really, we can never make the structure do what we want it to do, to express the individuality and what people really want at that particular time. And that quote was from almost 200 years ago, which I found pretty amazing. And then another quote was talking about how people's activities within buildings were transformed. And this was the introduction of plumbing and electricity. Now, I have never lived in a house without plumbing or electricity, so I don't actually appreciate just how much of a difference it makes. And I guess when you go camping, you appreciate that you act very differently. So what we would really like to do is introduce a new utility into the houses of the future in order to actually make them better. Because that's really what we want to do. We want them to be more efficient, but we also want them to be fundamentally better and more pleasant. And then the last thing is what had once been luxuries soon became necessities. I certainly remember before telephone answering machines and before mobile phones, thinking that those were sort of excessive luxuries, but now, of course, I'm dependent on them as much as anyone else. So when things are useful, they can happen quickly. So to summarize, looking at sort of the past versus the future, the paradigm of physics to looking one more of information, which doesn't make the physics any less important and useful. It's absolutely as necessary as ever. It's just we're adding something to it. The tool you have is your architectural or your structural design of the house or the building in general, and adding to that what I call a building network, because it's not just for houses. We really want it to be universal towards any type of building. And then the way you express this is through either the static structure of the building in one case or through dynamic activity as people interact with their buildings. So what is a building network? So in principle, it's the notion that everything within a building is, in principle, could be networked to each other and communicating and coordinating. Now, in 20 years, are you going to have all these things in your house networked? No, but you have some of these networked today. In a third of TVs sold this year will have an internet connection, and more things will get network connections incrementally as people find them useful for various purposes. And once they can communicate and cooperate, they can share information, they can give each other suggestions as what they want them to do, and you could do useful things. Certainly lighting is a case where you can imagine that, well, if you walk into a room, the room should know you're there and turn on the lights appropriately, or if you leave, they can turn them off. And similarly with audio information, the sound should come on when you want it and go off when you don't want it. If you're in a room by yourself and the phone rings, why should you go pick up the phone? Why not just talk like people do in their cars sometimes, where the microphone and the speaker is there? We have to stop embedding ourselves in the past way of doing things and think towards how could things actually be better. So, so that's what a building network is. It's when anything can potentially communicate. So now why would you do this? Well, you would do this because they would do useful things for us, like a mobile phone or an answering machine or any of these things. Once they're useful, people will go out and buy them. And actually, they'll go out and they'll buy them not on the energy budget, which is a critically important thing here. So we need to design our building networks around the needs of people first, not for any other purpose, not like energy, but people's functional needs first. So we can, as best as possible, determine what it is that people really want in terms of heating or cooling or lighting or sound or vision or whatever it is, and then provide that and provide no more than that. So, and also in terms of why we might do this, the internet has, over the last 20 years, has really transformed our relationship to the information world in terms of how we gather and consume and share information. It's really just, it's been like another new utility in the sense of transforming people's activities. So it's my belief that over these coming decades, building networks will serve the same thing, but for the physical world, not for the information world. And it's the physical world where we cause environmental damage. So that's tremendously important. So the key is that when people invented the internet, 30, 40 years ago, they had no idea the things we would be using it for today. But they developed an architecture where potentially any element on the network could communicate with any other element for whatever useful purpose people might think of in the future. So that's the critical thing, is we need to develop this infrastructure so that anything can communicate for what we can't imagine yet. So we might have apps for buildings. You go to your local app store and you get, somebody out there in Bangalore writes some new way of things to do something, and you download it, and then suddenly your life is better now because your building is more adaptable to whatever you want. But actually, a building is really sort of too big a unit of scale to operate in. What we really want is to start with apps for rooms. So you might have, this is your room of the future. Now, the point here is not that we would have high-resolution display screens on every wall surface, but more that, that our living environments would be much more dynamic and adaptable to our needs to give us what we want, but give us no more than what we want. So how do we do this? Well, there's a lot of to and fro in the economy about what's the hardware going to be to make this happen? But that's really, eventually that'll be unimportant. Once things can communicate interoperably, it doesn't matter what the physical layer is for how things communicate. Another point is that, like the internet, devices will, for the most part, manage themselves. They'll manage their own power state or their own functional state, and then they'll do things differently by communicating with each other, but they're their own master. And it's much easier to take a collection of objects and have them cede some amount of authority to some central control, because there is some role for central control, than it is to take central control and then disperse it around sort of to these other objects. And we can think of analogies to sort of political systems and realize that how that works. So there are going to be central devices to coordinate activities and coordinate journalist policies, but it's really, each device needs to be intelligent and communicating. And what we want to do is, as close as possible to the people involved, make the decisions relevant to them, because that's where the information is that's relevant, and that's where the things you could do that are actions based on all these network devices are that can actually do things. So distributed rather than centralized. So energy. I'm most of the way through my talk, I promise, and I haven't really talked about energy at all. Now, so why is that? It's because people are not going to put in these networks primarily for energy purposes. They'll put them in there for other purposes, which actually is good because we're not buying them on the energy budget. We don't have to convince people to do it for an energy purpose. They'll go off and do it on their own. So then what we need to do is make sure that the technologies that people install have features in them which allow us to save energy, sort of like a sort of Trojan horse. Another way to think about this is that the energy is the tail and the functionality is the dog. That's really what's driving it. We're just kind of going along for the ride. So once we provide people what they want, then we can try to minimize energy. And I'm confident that through things like this, we can actually save a lot of energy if we actually design them right up front. I used to work on trying to reduce paper use of just ordinary office paper, and people would say, oh, in the future we'll have the paperless office because we've got this information technology. Now, the people who were inventing information technology did not have a goal of reducing paper use, and in fact, people who were trying to reduce paper use were never involved in the development of that technology, so it's no surprise that it didn't work out so well. But we have an opportunity to do it right this time. An awful lot really comes down to the question of what do people want? How does the room that you're in know what it is that you want? And that's actually, I think, a very complicated question in terms of how devices will infer your preferences. And so I'm, for the most part, going to put that aside, except to note that some of these things are your sort of static preferences about how hot or cold you like spaces and how bright you like lights and such. And some of it's dynamic that's going to vary with the time of day, the activity you're engaged in. But there is this element of electricity prices. So what we need to do is have every individual device be price responsive to whatever the price on the grid is, and have a sort of a conceptual dial like this, where 0 means I don't care what the price is, and 10 means I really care a lot. So if you've got your medical device or your computer with your important information on it, you're going to put it at 0. And maybe your refrigerator you put at 3, and maybe your air conditioner you put at 7, and maybe your pool pump you put at 10 because it doesn't really matter when the pool pump goes. So devices will come with good defaults, and you can easily express your preferences in some way. Maybe like that, maybe other ways, I don't know, but you have some way for the building to determine what you want. Internally, it will then go through some complicated procedure to define how it should operate and how the refrigerator should let the temperatures float a little bit. But fundamentally, the interface for the person is very simple. And the good thing about this is that with the exception of vehicle charging, there's no actual direct coordination with the grid. Everything is accomplished through prices, which makes the meter as simple as possible, which is critical for designing things. So how do we get there? So as I noted, this will happen incrementally. It's already happening incrementally. Everybody in this room probably has one or more devices that's networked, whether it's your phone to the phone system or to your local Wi-Fi, your computers, your consumer electronics are increasingly digital. And we'll just simply add things to this. It's not going to be you'll spend $20,000 and add a lot of hardware. You can do that, but most of the people in this room, including myself, are not going to do that. We'll do it incrementally. When we design these systems, it's not about the grid. You wouldn't design a house by starting in the middle of the Interstate 80. You would design your house based on things that are important in the house. So we can get rid of this smart grid stuff and stop being distracted by that. We have to throw away early technology because when we're trying things out, when we're experimenting, a lot of those experiments won't work out well and technology gets better, so we don't want to get hung up on things that we can do today or tomorrow and have that impair what we can do in 20 years. So we don't need to be so upset about this experimental times. Perhaps the most important goal of all of this is what I call universal interoperability, where any device should work in any space with any person, and regardless of what continent you're on, things should just all work. Now that's not going to be 100% successful, but like within this country, you go to a store, you buy a device you plug into the wall, and it plugs into any plug. And that's sort of the type of universal interoperability we need to work towards. And finally, what people should demand is they should demand the highest possible functionality of their building networks and the most possible simplicity. And that's a tremendous design challenge, and that's what we need to be working on over these coming decades, is how to get those things together. Because if we don't do that, we'll end up wasting energy and we'll have lower functioning buildings. So thank you.
Okay. So we'll start over here. Please, when I give you the microphone, identify yourself and then keep the questions as short as you possibly can. We'll start right here. And if you have questions for Assemblymember Skinner, those you might want to direct them to her first because she's going to have to leave us before we probably finish with the Q&A period.
Teddy Crawford for the last speaker. It just occurred to me this might be an international problem coordinating it.
International problem.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Is it international?
Oh, absolutely, because if you want devices to work internationally, they have to be global standards. But we do that all the time with a lot of telephone such items, certainly Ethernet or USB. An awful lot of things are international. The World Wide Web is international in terms of how it's plumbing is constructed.
Can I make a quick comment, just to follow up with that? It's interesting, we in California developed some of this pricing messaging systems, and we're getting a lot of pushback from other states that it was invented in California and it doesn't fit in other states. And so I think it's a good question about international standards. We actually have challenges state by state as well.
Hi. Thank you. I was wondering what your thoughts were on how this is going to happen. I mean, the networked home, that idea has been around for 20 years and it really hasn't happened. And I'm interested that the last speaker, you said you thought it wasn't going to get there through energy, but for other uses. But I'm curious what the panel as a whole thinks how that's going to happen. I always thought the white goods coming in demand response might kind of be the Trojan horse, but you kind of positioned it as the opposite. And I'm curious how that's going to, what you guys think collectively is going to really drive that to happen, because there's nothing new here technologically.
I actually think that the appliances are a way that some of this interoperability is going to get in homes. You can buy a thermostat today with something called a Usnap portal that can talk Zigbee, Wi-Fi, or Z-Wave, or FM broadcast. So we're starting to see devices that are going to come into homes with little modules that you can plug into them, and the modules will allow them to communicate over different networking infrastructures. Our preference is Wi-Fi because Wi-Fi, which is internet, if you have a wireless server in your home, we are trying to develop systems that can use that existing infrastructure to communicate. So your electric meter, your dishwasher, your thermostat, and your lights might be able to communicate through a common internet systems.
But I would comment that it could be that it's our appliances and such that do that, and partly because young people now, they really are already digital. They have digital minds. They do everything digitally. Right. But we may find a lot of resistance, or maybe not resistance, just that kind of slow adaptation. Because, all right, let's just take water meters, for example. The entire city of Sacramento and county of Sacramento are not water metered. So residential and commercial properties have no water meters, things that we totally take for granted. And we, of course, look at our ebb mud bills, and we look at our usage because we know we're charged on our usage. But we've had water meter technology for all this time. We've had droughts and the whole bit, and yet we've got large parts of the state that have no water meters. So I think we can find a lot of pockets of resistance in different types of either, whether it's utility structures, governmental structures, who knows?
Yeah, I think that's really true, because none of this is going to happen overnight. I mean, Bruce made the point that these things have been evolving for some time, and there are iPhone apps for home automation. You can control your thermostat from an iPhone app today, but not everybody wants to. The iPad will be an in-home display device, the new Mac iPad. So there are technologies coming. Which ones are going to come and how quickly, that we don't know.
I would just like to add one thing to this debate. If we get all of our appliances and our buildings and our hot water down to very, very low amounts of energy required to do all those things, that's my preferred path. Then we don't have to have all this networking trying to figure out how to save the energy. We'll just make sure we don't use it in the first place, or we make sure we have appliances that don't use it. And we'll keep it all simple, hopefully.
But I'd like to add something to that as well. Iain mentioned that he wanted grid scale renewables. And the technology that I talked about for changing your loads in your home are actually built to facilitate that as well. So that when the wind's coming down and the solar's coming up, we want the loads to be able to be flexible. And not all loads are flexible, but loads that are flexible should be moved to different times of the day. So there is some load leveling done within the home and at the grid level. And it's that interaction where there's going to be some opportunities to do things differently.
So we have a question over here.
My name's Dan. My question related to some of this technological changes, appliances and home systems seem to be one of the few places where you don't have to invest so frequently in new materials and stuff, because that stuff still lasts for a long time. And I guess I'm curious, how do you balance, what sounds starting to sound to me like an 18-month product cycle or something like that, so we can get all this new technology against the material investment in that stuff?
Just do it incrementally, and hopefully people just replace the device when it should be replaced for other reasons, and just the new ones will all come with the networking capability, so you won't throw things away that are perfectly good just to get that, hopefully. So that goes along with this incrementalism, I would say. Whether it's fast enough, it's as fast as it's going to be, is my sense.
You raise a very good point. In Berkeley here, you have this RECO, when a home is bought or sold that requires some sort of energy upgrades, but relatively few homes are bought and sold every year. And if we waited for RECO to work its way through the system, I'll be dead before we've got to all the houses in Berkeley. And probably, I'm not sure if I'm the youngest person here, but most of you will be too. And we have to move faster than that. And you're right, it is an issue. And yeah, if I just bought a new refrigerator 3 years ago, if a super duper one comes along that uses half the energy today, but my old one is good for another 10 years. Should I swap it out? And we have to think about things like the embodied energy in the things we might throw away. It took a lot of stuff to make that refrigerator. Do we want to throw it out? And you're right, that absolutely is gonna slow things down. But really, there's no simple answer to that. In other words, I don't think we want to obsolete things that aren't obsolete too quickly. And I think some patience will be required.
Couple of comments there. Not only a lot of embodied energy in all those products, that whether it's your cell phone or your computer, laptops now that seem to, who said 18 months, even less sometimes, or your iPod or your other listening device, but there's also a lot of toxics in those materials, at least as they are made today. So when with as much as we want innovation, we are creating a lot of different hazards by virtue of changing them over so quickly. But on a little comment on RECO, can't help it, but I authored it. And it was actually passed in 1981, and about 60% of Berkeley's housing stock has changed hands since that time. And while it could have been, there's a lot of parts of it that could be improved, we now have the highest energy efficiency per square foot building stock of any place in California. Berkeley does. But just as the last little comment on that, it is why in my bill AB 758, I did not mandate it that it must only be done at point of sale, because I wanted it to happen faster. Point of sale is allowed to be a trigger if Energy Commission or PUC wants to use it, but I didn't mandate it that it be only because I didn't want to wait so long.
On this point of how fast is fast enough to get the results we want, Iain made an excellent point that the best thing we can do is reduce the size of the buildings we occupy of any sort. And if we can increase the quality of spaces, perhaps we can decrease the quantity that we require in exchange, and that would be a tremendous benefit.
Here's another question.
This is Mohammed. I'm a mechanical engineer. I live in a 1,200 square feet house. My electric bill is $900 and above. I wonder if you can tell me, I put all the brand new appliances, and so my bill is around $900. And windows are all thermal windows, double pane, and I put whatever I could see in the market, I put into the house, but still I wonder why it's so expensive.
Is that $900 a month or $900 a year?
Yes, sir. $900 a month, and I live in East Bay.
I hope there's no representative of PG&E here, but did you just get a smart meter recently? Would appear that some, not all, of the smart meters have had some problems, and also that some of the meter readers haven't been fully trained on how to read the smart meter. So we have noticed that some people's bills have increased since the installation of the smart meter, but that may not explain your particular circumstance.
I used to pay $225 since they put a smart meter, and that was the outcome.
Then I think you need to call PG&E and have them, no, seriously, if your bill has gone up since the installation of the smart meter, you do need to have them call them and come out and check it, because the meter reader may not be reading it correctly. We've already discovered that, and there also may have been a problem in the installation, so.
Okay, we have a question up here in the rooftop.
Yes, this is also sort of a related political question. In particular, Mary, you talked a lot about peak demand and how bad it is, and how we avoid that. Are you working at all with legislature, the PUC, in trying to implement some of this stuff? Because PG&E is going the opposite direction, right? They've filed a rate case to reduce from 5 tiers to 3, and in particular reduce the rates that people are paying for peak demand. So, what do we do to fix the political part of this? Because the technology's nice, but if we don't do it politically and actually implement it, it's not going to do anything for us.
Right. The technology that we've been developing is part of the National Smart Grid Standards, and most of the work that we've done so far is with commercial and industrial facilities. And we have about over 70 megawatts that are automated with this technology. There's a little bit of redundancy with the advanced meter infrastructure on the residential side, so we haven't been aggressively pursuing this technology with homes, and that's more a research project at this time. It's something we are looking into, whether and what the policy might be for the state to use this in the homes, but the majority of the work's been with large facilities. And it's available to any large building over 200 kilowatts that already has an hourly meter, and PG&E will install the box for free, and we're installing, dozens of them, hundreds of them each summer, so it is scaling up.
Another reason it's terribly important to work on demand response today is that if we actually believe that we're going to be successful and our buildings in 20 years will use significantly less electricity than they do today, what that will mean is that in California we will have an excess of infrastructure in terms of transmission lines and substations and capacity and such. So the last thing we would want to do is this year and next year and the year after build out more capacity. We instead want to not do that, because that will be wasted investment in a few years once we're successful on the building side.
Also, like all public agencies, the PUC does take public input, so all of you that just heard that the PUC has opened this rate filing around PG&E's desire to drop down to 3 tiers can either email, write, or call and express your objection.
Question over here.
Hi, good talk so far. I wanted to say a lot of the talk here has been about sort of house retrofitting and industrial applications, but I think a lot of us probably live in apartments. And could you suggest any resources to either get landlords to fix apartments, or are there things we can individually do to help our own apartments and help our own electricity bills?
Well, apartments are like houses, but big with lots of people in them. So in terms of, from a technological point of view, there's not a lot different. You would still do the same things to have good windows, have good insulation, and so on. But what's interesting about apartments is they actually offer us some opportunities to do things better. And by that I mean we can have a central system for heating the water. And that's often much more efficient than if you had to have several hot water systems if all of the people in the apartment building all lived in their individual homes. However, I will say that there is almost no work being done on what are we going to do to retrofit apartment buildings. This is nationwide, almost nothing. But it's one of those things that's on everyone's agenda, but nobody ever seems to get to it. Right now, our focus is on single-family homes. But I think that I think we will get there. And in fact, I'm working with a group called Affordable Comfort, who are a national organization. And they have a thing called the 1,000 Home Challenge. And what they want to do is to get 1,000 homes nationwide deep energy retrofitted to save the 75% and basically get to net zero. And part of that work with that group of people is, in fact, to set aside some time and effort specifically for multifamily buildings.
Practically, you're correct that a lot of the improvements that would really demonstrate to you as an apartment dweller some significant energy savings are ones that aren't available to you. In other words, the owner must do them. They're in the building envelope. They're either in, say, the hot water system or the insulation or something like that, or even the windows. And that was part of my motivation for AB 758, because we still have close to a majority of the state's residents who are tenants, who are renters, not owners. And so we needed to motivate the owner, who doesn't often pay the utility bill. It's the tenant who pays the utility bill in many cases. We needed to motivate that owner to make the energy efficiency improvement, since the owner didn't have the financial motivation to do so. So that was part of the purpose. But for those of you who are apartment dwellers, there are still things that you can do. For example, I forget who had the slide up that indicated, or maybe it was the reference to going up to LBNL's site to look at your own energy usage. Well, most of our appliances, our TVs, our stereo systems, all of that, are microwaves, all kinds of things. They are what you call vampire units. They're drawing electricity 24/7, even if they're not quote unquote on. And so a simple thing you can do for those appliances that you don't need on 24/7 is to put them on power strips, and to just turn the power strip off at night or when you're not using them, and then they aren't drawing. And it's quite remarkable how much electricity savings you'll see just in that. And of course, obviously, utilizing CFLs, other things like that, which are available to you as an apartment dweller.
So we have a question from one of the youngest members of our audience.
Hello, I'm doing a science fair project on phantom loads or vampire power, and I had a question. How would you in the future house, how would you control your phantom loads or vampire power? Because I heard it accounts for about 10% of your whole energy bill. It can cost you $200 a year.
Well, power strips are a great idea. Make sure something is actually off. I grew up in a country where we actually have a switch on our outlets, so you can actually turn things off, but you don't have those here. Maybe we will one day. It's a new technology we'll bring to this country. But having said that, there's only so much you can do about putting things on power strips, right? Or actually physically pulling the plug. That's something that you don't always remember to do, or whatever. So I think looking a little bit further into the future, folks who work on looking at standards for how much an appliance uses, whether it's a television set or a refrigerator or a stereo system or your phone charger, whatever it is, they're looking at actually regulating these vampire loads and making sure that we minimize or turn it to zero. And we're actually going to have standards that say these devices, you won't be able to sell them if they use a lot of energy when they're turned off. But those sort of things are still in the works. For now, you have to physically do something. You have to flip that switch or pull the plug. Bruce?
It's also important to distinguish there are some things, particularly older products, maybe 10 years old, that use a lot of power when they're off. And a lot of very modern products that you buy today use actually very little when they're off. So it's a very different situation depending on what you're talking about. Also, in the future, when things are networked, they'll want to maintain that network connection. So in fact, you won't want them off. You want them to be asleep and still connected to the network. But it is possible, there's no technical reason why you can't make very efficient sleep modes at very low power levels. And that's, I think, really where the future is. Because we really don't want to have people spending all their time flipping switches on and off. They probably have better things to do with their time, unless you're controlling a big load. And then the question is it a big load? And the simplest thing to do is put your hand on it. And if it feels really hot, it's a big load. And if it doesn't, it's not. In the short term, we do have some of those. In the long term, that is actually something where there's a fairly simple technological and policy fix to make sure people can't sell really bad appliances.
So Bruce, for all your network devices, they often don't need to communicate all the time or even very much. And so there's work being done where we simply won't plug them into the wall outlet anymore. There's enough vibration in the room that you can have enough power that it will send a little bleep of a radio signal every 5 minutes or whatever. And so there are some sort of what I call cutting edge technologies which are coming down the pipe that are going to alleviate the need for us to have these things plugged in.
But we shouldn't have to manually switch those. They should just automatically cut their power to as low as possible.
Well,
Isn't this great, this kind of conversation among scientists here?
Yeah, let me make one quick comment, and that is, I think that we really have to make consumption more visible. So if you have a power strip in your kitchen, or from when you walk in and you look at your thermostat, if you could see, oh, I plugged in it and it's done charging, it's going to automatically turn off or something like that. So we all wonder what's on at night when we're sleeping. I mean, at least I do. Maybe not everybody does. We do. And we have this idea that if we had more information, we could manage those loads better. So it's part of what you're hearing is that we want feedback devices that actually tell us what's on and what's off. And if it's on just a little, does it really need to be on? So that we're going to understand better what's using energy and how it's using energy.
Yeah, we actually did a study a few years ago for California about how much energy is used by devices when they're not actively doing something. And we came to about 13% of the average California household's electricity is used for that. Now that includes things like your GFCI outlets with a test reset button. Those use power all the time. And there's smoke detectors, if they're hardwired, use power all the time. So it's not that we could get that to zero. But I think an even greater problem is things like DVD players or VCRs. When the movie's done, they stay on even though there's no movie being watched. And just because you turn off the TV, they're not smart enough to put themselves to sleep. And another example, most energy used by personal computers in the US occurs when nobody's there. Those machines should automatically go to sleep and stay connected to the network. And again, these are things that there's ready technological fixes for. We don't actually have to invent new technology. We just have to deploy it.
Here's another question.
You talked about there's so many smart devices coming, our refrigerators, our thermostats, blah, blah, blah. If I was to stay on the web running my computer using a lot of power trying to search Google to find all these individual little things, it's just frustrating. There's 5 million hits if you went to search for energy efficient whatever. Do you think, is there going to be any reputable place, maybe Berkeley Lab, I don't know, but which we could kind of go to this one spot and here's the stuff that's clicking onto the, clicking out right now. Here's a great thing that just happened about washers. So-and-so's got a great, GE's got a great washer that's now connected. It would be great to know that there was one place we could go, we could kind of trust, and it would say, here's the stuff as it dribbles out to us over the next 20 years, as you guys have been talking about. That would be a really great thing to have.
Well, there's kind of a site like that right now. ACEEE, the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy. If you go up onto their website, now, it's not real time, so it doesn't necessarily show you like if a new appliance comes out tomorrow that is just state-of-the-art energy efficient. But it does, on more than an annual basis, rate all of our common appliances and what are the most energy efficient, the models, you name it. And so it's quite a very, very useful site from that point of view.
We do work for the Energy Star program. And so to some degree, Energy Star may serve that function in future. But if you go to a store and there's 10 models of a product that you're looking at to choose amongst, if you can go and do the research to figure out which one of those is actually the good one to buy, that's good for you, but then other people will end up buying the crummy products. What we really want is for like 9 of those 10 or 10 of those 10 to actually be better, so that regardless of what people do, they'll end up with a better product. And that's actually so that people don't have to spend the extra effort seeking them out. You don't want to go to the store and look for the brand of bread that isn't moldy. You don't want them all to be not moldy.
I'm Jonathan Livingston, and I would like to ask the panelists about a theme. Hi, Marianne. I'd like to ask the panelists about a theme that has almost come up a bunch of times. And it's the theme that somebody mentioned Priuses and also iPads. Those came up, and iPhones are another one. These are products that people have to have. I mean, you look at the line, you look at the fact that the iPad sold 1 million in, what was it, the first 30 days or something. How do we attach this level of consumer passion and desire and lust to the zero net energy home? And I'm going to ask this question first of Nancy and then Iain, and if anyone else wants to comment.
Well, I suppose I'm like, I think it was Iain that made the comment. I'm one of those who believes that that it shouldn't just be up to consumer preference, that as long as performance is equal, that, for example, all the buildings that we build should be of that level of efficiency. All the appliances that are on the market should be of that level of efficiency, all the lighting devices. So I'm a huge supporter of things like California's appliance standards. We just passed, for example, a new rule around the large television screens, because just how they manufacture those huge flat screens, there's, one manufacturer, it works just as well, manufacturer X as manufacturer Y, but just the number of light bulbs and the type of light bulb that they put behind that screen changes the energy consumption of it by, 35 minimum up to 55, 60%. So we just made a reg that flat out says within a certain year, all flat screen television models will be sold at the higher efficiency. That's the only kind that'll be available. So that's what I'm an advocate of.
I have a less draconian idea. But I love the draconian idea, but there are options. You're talking about marketing. How do we sell all this? And the building industry as a whole doesn't do any. They're totally and completely useless at marketing. They have no idea what sort of houses people want to live in. They're basically in the dark ages from that point of view. And so you're right, they don't market any of this stuff. And the solution that some people I know have come up with is folks at national labs are also pretty crummy at that. And honestly, politicians too. But
the reg was by the Energy Commission.
But some people are good at it. And this idea of, let's say, selling home retrofits for energy efficiency, we're not going to do it. But somebody like Home Depot and Lowe's might do it. And so we're talking to those people and getting them to sell it, because they're good at selling stuff. They have gigantic marketing organizations, and they will make it sexy and make it sell. And we won't have to. And I don't think there's any point in us trying to invent an amazing DOE marketing scheme, because DOE geeks are no good at that. And we're not very good at lying, for example, so we're not very good at marketing. And we should let the people who are good at that do it. And we will.
So actually, since Iain brought up Home Depot, watch out in the next, I don't know how quickly it'll roll out, but Congress just passed a program that's like Cash for Clunkers, and Home Depot will be one of the major entities marketing it, where you will get a rebate for buying certain efficiency devices for your home and demonstrating that they were installed. So that will be rolling out. I'm not sure exactly how quickly, but within the next 6 months, and you'll be seeing it, again, Home Depot, probably Orchard Supply, PG&E, all kinds of ways that marketing will happen.
It's called Homestar.
Right. So what I have a couple comments, and that is that we do know as researchers that social networking is one way to message with people, and that we do believe that education matters a lot. A lot of people would do the right thing if they knew what the right thing was, but it's so confusing often to buy the right thing, to install the right thing, to manage your home. A lot of people just have no idea that what they're doing, the way they run their home, makes a difference. So I think there's a huge amount of education with kids, and how to make green be cool is something that we should spend a lot of time on, I think, as a society with K through 12 education and science. We also know, and you probably know Mark Martinez at SoCal Edison, who, when we were talking about communicating thermostats, they were looking at how do you make a really cool skin for the thermostat so it's pink or green or red, and it's like art in your home, or something that makes energy efficiency in some devices in your home, like the orb. People love the orb. And you know, that it has to be, if there is novelty, it will be more interesting to people. So what the killer app is, you know, iPhone apps, there could be much more done with iPhone apps. We don't quite have the home communication devices yet, but they're coming. This box here, we've been thinking about how to communicate with people about this complex communication standard, and today I was meeting with Clean Tech to Market folks at UC Berkeley, and we were thinking about powered by Intel. You know, people know what that means. Powered by Intel is on their PC, and we're going to have this depowered by OpenADR. So we're trying to be market savvy, but we're not always good at it.
So before we take the next question, I'm just curious, how many more questions are there since Assemblymember Skinner is going to have to leave? Could you raise your hand so we can see? Okay, we could probably take those. All right, we have one up here.
We're talking too much. They want to ask.
My name is Jeremy, and I'm from Albany High School. If we make the technology cheaper, how, like, some people can't afford it, like, they're, like, in poverty and stuff. So in, like, the far future, will the government possibly endorse it, like, give them money to improve their houses, to make the world better?
The short answer is that already happens. There's a thing called the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is a federal program that services low-income people nationwide, and they do hundreds of thousands of homes a year, get energy-efficient upgrades through that program. What's new with the current administration is they're extending that to what they call the middle class, and we can debate all night how they define that. So that this Home Star program is part of that, where there's going to be more of that for people who aren't quite at the poverty level, who are just above it, and maybe even apply to me, for crying out loud. But the short answer is some of those programs already exist. And they got expanded massively over the last 18 months. Many of the weatherization programs literally had a zero added to the end of their budget. And they're frantically trying to hire people and train contractors and get more and more homes and buildings fixed up. So that is definitely happening.
Okay, another question here.
Okay, so one of the themes is lifestyle changes, and I think each of the speakers has addressed it in some way or another. But I think we also need to look at zero energy buildings in which we live as more than just a single family home. I think one of the people who asked the question got around to it, and we sort of didn't really address it, and it was about apartment dwellers. But not everybody that lives in a multi-family building is a renter. And I think we need to look at beyond the family, single family home, and really start addressing how do we design cities and how do we design communities in such a way that we encourage density and we don't discourage it, because my guess is that many people in this room would oppose a medium scale, large building within a block or two. Other people would, absolutely love it. I live in a condo, and I have 3 ways of getting into San Francisco where I work every day. And my utility bills are anywhere from the mid-20s to the mid-40s per month on average. So I think beyond the single-family home, we really need to start addressing how we develop communities and cities.
Well, I'll just respond, and that's a very, very good point, because while we've been focusing on the energy use within buildings, and I know that you have a broader point, but if we were to put up a pie chart on the screen there of the carbon in California or the fossil fuel energy use, it is really actually much higher in the transportation sector than it is in the building sector. So our use of our vehicles and how far we have to travel to either go to work or do our errands or whatever it is that we use our vehicles for is a huge contributor to our energy use. And the way we design our where we live would have a great impact on, if we design it wisely, on reducing that energy use.
Yeah, 2 points. You mentioned the word lifestyle changes and didn't quite explain what you meant, but in the popular sort of discourse, what tends to happen is anytime people say lifestyle changes, they are implying that it's always for the negative. And I think that actually lifestyle changes can be for the positive too. It's, the other thing is that in terms of density, I actually live next door to a 12-unit apartment building, and the people in there are very nice. The main problem is it's a really ugly building. But there's nothing about apartment buildings which says they have to be ugly. And it's also, it doesn't encourage social interaction. And there's nothing about apartments that does that. So it's just a badly designed building. It's not inherent in it being multifamily.
Okay, I understand something that you need to leave. So I think we're going to end the questions for the moment. And so thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it. So we actually do have the results from the last one. So this is the Prius effect. Clearly it works, at least among those who voted. Oh, you can't see it on it. It's not projecting at this point. Well, I can tell you what it said.
Be less energy used that way.
Here we go, about 82% or 80-some% or more. Okay, so let's ask the question again about the zero net energy home. For those of you who are still here, you can text. So do you think you'll ever live in a net zero energy house? Yes, 3171, no, 3177, maybe 3134. We don't have as many people here, so the percentage will be skewed, but we don't care. Go ahead and vote. That was one person voting who said no.
The voter said no.
Yes, okay. We were at 60, 30, and 10, I think, last time. Yeah. Okay, oh, look. Okay, well, approximately the same.
We can't comment on this. We see the sample size.
Okay, well, we'll probably have time for a couple of more questions, and then we're going to shut down for the evening. So I see a couple hands up. Okay. You had one here.
Yeah.
Interesting comment earlier about the home building industry being useless. Kind of brought up a question of how much discourse have you had with industry manufacturers to kind of help bring it from ideology into practicality?
The answer to that is we do that all the time, all day, every day. Through things like professional organizations, whenever we have to set standards for performance, for example, those standards are always set with the manufacturers at the table, and sometimes they're the ones who ask for it, frankly, mostly because they see it as an opportunity for marketing. You know, they like the idea of having a more efficient air conditioner they can sell. They still want to sell the less efficient ones too, because it's all about marketing. But they come to the table all the time, and we're constantly working with the building industry. For example, DOE for new construction has had an organization called Building America, which has worked with many large builders nationwide to build thousands of energy efficient homes. And these are projects where they work directly with production builders to help them to change their production processes so they can learn how to do advanced framing techniques, how they can learn how to install windows better and all those sort of things. So those things are happening all the time.
Should I go ahead? Okay, my name's Aaron Reven, and I would like your estimation of the Rocky Mountain Institute approach or theme that electric vehicles charged by solar photovoltaics could be reverse flowed back into the grid and into homes and become actually a source of power for homes. Is that realistic? How feasible is that?
Well, there wouldn't be a source, it's just storage that you're utilizing, right? Because you're not creating new energy in the car, you're just storing it during the daytime and then releasing it back at night, which might be useful.
So, I think he was talking about putting the PVs onto the grid and then using more electric cars, sort of a balancing. Right now, the grid is not a two-way system. And while there are homes that put electricity into the grid, so when the meter flows backwards, the scale at which that's done today is very small. In fact, to build a two-way grid requires technology that we don't have to manage and balance the grid. We are potentially transitioning towards a future where it is a two-way grid, but today's grid actually doesn't support that kind of transaction. It's hard enough to manage the aging grid. And to manage a two-way grid will require more understanding of the power flows and the sources and the sinks on the grid.
So that was our last question for the evening. Thank you very much for coming. Thank our Berkeley Lab scientists. We'll see you in September.